Hey there guys, welcome back for another Mortal Realms painting video. This week taking a look at the Knight Venator, or the Knight Azeroth, from issue 40 of the Mortal Realms magazine. Now, as you can see here, I decided to go for the Knight Venator instead of the Knight Azeroth, just because I like the look of this guy better. Like I say, I don't really play them in games, and so I'm going more for looks rather than what would make the better character for the army. Now obviously if you guys have picked up a couple of copies of the mag, then you'll have this guy as well as the Knight Azeroth. Obviously you get the parts to make either or with each issue, so a couple of issues gives you both options. So getting into this, as you can see I'm going to be painting this in sub-assemblies. Starting first here with the knight himself. Obviously I've got him on a base, which I've put some basic basing material on, and I've gone ahead and primed him with a grey primer, and I'm now applying some Incubi Darkness, as I do with all my Celestial Vindicators, and this is the base slash shadow layer. So obviously this is going to go over any of that sort of blue turquoise tone armour that he has. So that will be like the legs, as you can see here, the top part of the legs, you know, the thighs, the gauntlets, which I'll be obviously doing a little bit later in the video, his chest, and just on his back as well. Obviously leaving those areas that are going to be gold or white in the grey primer for now. So obviously to keep these videos short, I will be skipping forward, and we'll come back once I've got a good few layers of this on. Okay, so now that the Incubi Darkness has had a good few coats on there, giving it a nice smooth finish, I'm now going to go in and paint in all the areas that are going to either be black or gold, with Abaddon Black. So obviously this is going to be for the arrows on his pouch that are on his back in the quiver, the arrow and bow that he is holding. Now obviously the gauntlets are the turquoise, but the bow itself is going to be a combination of black and gold, along with the wings. Obviously the wings and the bow and that I'll be showing a little bit later in the video, but just in case you want to paint along with this, then obviously you know those are the areas that I'm painting black as well. But yeah, essentially all of the gold areas are going to be painted black, as I feel it gives a better base coat for gold, rather than what a lighter undercoat like grey or white does. I think black just really makes the gold stand out a little bit more than the paler colours. So obviously you can see here I'm painting into the his under armour, which obviously is going to be black. So yeah, just going around getting anything gold or black covered in that Abaddon Black. So I'll get on with this, and we'll be back in a flash. Okay, so I'm taking a mix here of Sotek Green and Incubi Darkness. I'd say it's probably about a 50-50 mix. Obviously I'm using the Incubi Darkness that's already on the palette there, and then you can see I'm just mixing a couple of blobs of the Sotek Green into that. This is using the Citadel basing brush, but I prefer to use it as a dry brush. So all I'm doing now off camera is just testing it on some paper towel. It was a little bit too dark, so obviously adding a little bit more of the blue in there. I'm looking for obviously a colour that's in between the two, so that I can use the Sotek Green as an additional highlight layer after this upcoming process. So here you can see that I've got pretty much everything off. This isn't a full dry brush, this is a bit more of a heavier dry brush. And all I'm doing now is covering, I'd say a good 75% of the blue. Now I'm not worried about this getting on the black. Obviously I could have done this before the black step, but just the way that I did it. Anything that gets on the black obviously will be neatened up if the area is to remain black. If it's got gold there, then I'm not too worried about it. You know, it's not going to affect the gold over the top. So all I'm looking to do here is cover, like I say, the majority of the model. Now you'll notice here that I've gripped the model around the banner parts that are coming off of him, and then supporting him with my index finger. This is so that the force of the dry brush doesn't snap that banner. Obviously he's a little bit springy, a little bit flimsy on there, so I just gave him a bit of extra support within my hand while I dry brush that top area. And then you can see here I'm just resting it on my fingers just so it's got that support and a little bit, you know, it's not springing everywhere. So yeah, obviously, like I say, give this a good covering. I think I go over this probably 2 or 3 times to get it to really build up. What I'm looking to get is a good saturation on those flat and exposed areas, and then the deeper recesses will obviously remain the incubi darkness. So obviously he's got that little groove between his chest plates, you know, between his pecs, and like the little lips under his greaves and things like that. Those are going to stay incubi darkness just to give that dark undertone, and then the rest of it we're going to build up to that brighter celestial vindicator turquoise colour. So again, I'll get on with this. See you guys in a bit. Okay, so with the dry brushing complete, I'm now going over with the pure Sotek green, slightly thinned down, and I'm just going to go round and edge highlight all of the armour. This isn't the final highlight, this is going to highlight some of those shaded areas as well. So this will obviously, as you can see, this does the top and bottom of the pec, the inside, the area that's under shadow. Because it's thinned, it is going to darken down a little bit, as some of that undertone will come through it and, you know, darken it down, which is what we want in those shadow areas. If this was to go on pure Sotek green in those shadow areas, to me personally, the way that I like models to look would look a little bit too vibrant in there. I prefer to have a subtle highlight in shadow areas and build up to those brighter highlights and edge highlight, more exposed, obviously exposed to daylight areas. So yeah. Okay, so I'm now going in with some Ahriman blue and picking off those sharper edge highlights where the light is going to obviously pick up more of the detailing. So this won't be going into those shadow areas now. This will be used pretty much on every area that is exposed to the light. You can see here with the chest plate, I'm just coming down on the top and the vertical, not the underside. And that's pretty much the same with any surface area really. What I'm doing here is just very carefully lining in and adding some reflective light off that armour, giving it a little bit of a shine. Obviously with the armour, to give it more of a shine, I could go in with a gloss varnish once I'm done, make it look glossy and metallic, but you know, I prefer to use matte varnish and have it just with a little bit of a shine, almost like it's a satin finish rather than a pure gloss or pure matte. And what I'll do next is immediately follow that up with a mix of the Ahriman blue and some white scar. This is probably about a 50-50 mix, maybe a little bit more white scar, just to get a nice pale blue. And this is going to be used as, again, another highlight. What this is going to do, the brighter that I add the highlights, the slightly brighter the armour is going to become, the blue that was already down, and then the darker those other areas will be. So it sort of ties it all in and brings that contrast together nicely. So obviously this is going on just where the light would catch the most now, those top outermost edges. You can see here just on the inside of the leg here, obviously the light's coming down at the angle, and it will catch that bottom corner area, the top of the foot, down the centre of the foot, you know, places like this. Okay, so I've now mixed up a little bit of a dark grey using the black and white, and I'm using this on all of the sort of the under armour and the black areas. So for example, his pouches and his belt, and then obviously the back of his knees, the inside of his elbows, things like that. And I'm using this purely as an edge highlight. Obviously the larger flatter area, surface areas will get a little bit more than just the edge. And then I'll go back over this with, again, adding a little bit more white to this grey mix, and building those edge highlights up to give them a little bit more of a shine. So rather than using, pulling out another paint and going with another grey, this is just to show that, black and white, it makes the same. So if like me, you're a paint collector and you're really bitten by the addiction, then you probably have a grey for this. But I'm just showing you guys that want to save a little bit more money, especially if you're just getting into the hobby. You don't have to buy hundreds of paints. You can pretty much mix any colour from 5 or 6 paints plus a black and white, and then you can pretty much do these guys. Obviously the pre-mixed stuff just makes it easier, but yeah, if you guys would like to see a video on that, me maybe doing a specific model with limited colours that I would then have to use to mix to make up other colours, let me know down in the comments, and I can maybe do that as a little challenge. Maybe obviously the primaries and the secondary colours along with black and white, and then we can see what exactly can be done with just those basic colours. So if that's something you want to see, let me know. But I'll get on with doing these grey highlights, and we'll come back in just a bit. Okay, so moving on now to these leather tabard piece that he's got at the front here. I'm just taking some Mephiston red and obviously just going in, filling this area in. Now you'll notice that I've done these the edges to this black. Obviously they're going to be gold, but whilst I'm doing this red, I will actually go over some of those areas, as with my eyes it was a little bit difficult to work out the exact shape of what was in the middle of these in terms of that little lightning bolt that's in there. I couldn't work it out until I got the red on there and could sort of see and feel how the shape of that moulded area or sculpted area was, and then I can then go back in with black and neaten that up and pick off that detail once it was easier. But with the grey, it was just a little bit difficult for me to tell the two apart. So obviously red wise, this is just the tabard pieces he's got here, and obviously on his helmet he's got all that hair piece that comes off, so that will be done in the red as well. The bird that this guy has will be shown at the end of the video, as I am particularly proud of how that came out, and hope that you guys will stick around and wait to see exactly how I go about doing the Fire Phoenix on this piece. Okay, so moving on now. As you can see, I'm applying some Balthazar gold to all of the gold areas. Now this is going to work as my undertone gold, sort of the shadow area gold, as I like to do true metallic metals, so using 2 or 3 different golds. And for this guy, I do believe I actually end up using a little bit of Reichland Flesh Shade gloss version, just to add a little bit of shadow, but obviously we'll see that when it comes to it later. But all I'm doing for now is going around all of these gold areas, obviously anywhere that is black, or at least supposed to be black with a bit of blue on it, and just getting a good 2 or 3 layers of this on there. Obviously, thin down, you don't want to go blobbing it on there, but use a little bit of thin down paint and get a good coat on there. Make sure it's nice and covered, none of that undertone is showing through or anything. But I'll get on with that, catch you guys back in a bit. Okay, so with the Balthazar gold done, I'm now taking some Retributor armour and going over what will be essentially my mid-tone areas. So this is any sort of large exposed flat area, as well as edge highlighting. I'm showing this area on the pauldron specifically as obviously it's quite a textured detailed pieces. It's got dips and ridges in there so that you can see roughly what I'm doing. Picking off the ridges, flat areas, going down into those recesses slightly, but leaving obviously the deeper parts with the Balthasar gold. Obviously on the kneecap here you can see as this knee would be exposed to a bit more light, I'm doing sort of a thick edge highlight. Around it here you can see again edge highlighting with the gold, but giving sort of, you know, a good 40% of the area will be Balthasar gold, 60% would be the Retributor armor. Basically just bearing in mind where that light is going to be, where the shadow, the Balthasar gold is the shadow. So yeah, painting just like you would any other colour. Put your highlight area where your highlights would be. Okay, so next up I'm taking some Ushapti bone and I'm just applying this over all of the banner area here. Sometimes for this I would do maybe a Zandri dust and then go over the highlight areas with the Ushapti bone. But for this I'm going to be using a wash to really pick out the detailing in that, and I think the Zandri dust just might have been a little bit too dark for it. I wanted it a little bit paler sort of, you know, colour. So yeah, as you can see this is going on fairly thin. You can still see some of that grey undertone there. So obviously this is going to get a good 2 or 3 layers on there to make sure that it is nice and even, a nice good opaque colour. So I'll get on with this bit and then we'll come in and start working on the shoulder pads and some of the other detailing. So as I said, moving on to the shoulder pads now. I'm just putting some ceramite white over all of the shoulder pads here. I'm not too worried about shadowing and stuff yet. That will come later with a little bit of a non-oil wash. But for now all I want to do is get a nice saturated white. With white the best thing to do is build it up with thin layers. You can see here that I'm not getting 100% coverage. You know, it's still got that greyish look to it, but I will go round and apply this, let it dry and then come back and go over. If you try to blob it on too thick or you go over the area too many times before it dries, you're not going to get a smooth white coat on there. It will either become a little bit tacky and you'll start pulling the paint up, or it will just not cover the area evenly, and you'll end up with some patches and that in there. So like I say, thin down, not too thin, just enough to, you know, get it on there and let it dry and then come back again with 2 or 3 coats and build it up to a nice solid bright white. Now obviously the areas for this are going to be the shoulder pad and both of his knees. He's got the one that has the more exposed rounded knee, and then his left knee he's just got that little sort of C shape, horseshoe shape above some of the gold area. So I'll get on with this and we'll come back in just a bit. Okay, so this guy, he's obviously got a large helmet on here and his face is a little bit difficult to get to whilst it's assembled. I could have done this as a sub-assembly, but I'm confident enough that I can get my brush in there, you know, to get the colour on. I'm not going to go overly detailed with it. I'm not looking for you know, a show quality or anything like that, you know, competition quality. I'm just looking to get a basic colour in there, a wash and then a highlight or 2. So yeah, all I'm trying to do is take some Cadian flesh tone and just getting it onto there with a couple of layers, obviously letting it dry between layers, and get his face painted in a little bit. Okay, so with the face drying, I'm now taking some Drakenhof Nightshade and I'm going to use this as the shadow and to sort of panel line and really define some of those edges and recesses on all of the blue armour. I'm using a size 0 brush here, so a nice thin one. It's not going to pick up a huge amount of the wash, and I'm not applying this like a wash. I am literally lining those dark areas. You can see down here right against that edge, and what this is going to do is cause a little bit of shadow, and it will separate those armour pieces a little bit, giving it a nice finish. Now I could do this with Nuln Oil, but I find the oil ends up a little bit too dark, and personally just doesn't look right to me. I think the Drakenhof Nightshade, having that blue in there, yet still dark, gives a good nice contrasting shadow within this turquoise area. So obviously I'm going to go around all of the areas like this where plates overlap or join up, where there's maybe detailing etched in around some of the gold areas and things like that, and I'll get on with that and we'll come back in just a bit. Okay, so carrying on with the shade paints now, I've moved on to Reikland Flesh Shade Gloss, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use this for the shadow and some of the deeper recesses on the armour. Obviously the reason I'm using the gloss is it's got that shiny finish and it's not going to sort of dull down and matte down the shadow areas. It will still retain that shade, sorry, that shininess. And you can see here I am letting it pool a little bit within some of this, because as it settles and dries, that is going to thin down, and that will leave a nice shadow in those recessed areas. Obviously I apply this all over the gold areas on the model. Some of the areas I'll panel line it more and just get some of the recesses. Some of the areas that are maybe here, for example, on the knee, you can see that it's a little bit too thin an area, so I'll just put that right over and then sort of pull it away a little bit. And all I'm looking to do is just add a little bit of shadow area, as though this was maybe like a Nuln Oil or something like that. And then whilst that's drying, I'll take this Agrax Earth Shade here, sorry, the Reikland Flesh Shade Non-Gloss, and this is for the face, and all this is going to do, just blob it in there and it's going to settle down into those recesses. Like I said, I wasn't going hugely detailed on the face, nice and simple, with the paint, and then throw in the shade in there. Obviously applied it to the hair here, and the red on the tassels. Because the Reikland Flesh Shade does have a reddish tint to it, this works fine for shadow areas. You could also use Druky Violet if you want a little bit more of a bluer, cooler tone, or even Nuln Oil, or I can't remember what the red one is, but the red shade. But I think that the Reikland Flesh Shade Non-Gloss does give a nice warm shadow to these red areas. Right, and then following that shade up, I'm now using some Seraphim Sapia, and this is going to be for the long scroll piece, obviously coming from his waist. Now the reason I'm doing all the shades in one is that because they're separate areas, they're not going to mix with each other, and then I can leave them all to dry rather than doing one, letting it dry, do another, let it dry, because they take about 10 to 20 minutes to dry, depending on how thick it's put on. If you can get away with putting it all in one go, then work through them, put them all in one go. So what I'm trying to do here is get it to concentrate and fill in all of that script that is sculpted in here, and then stain the surface area, ready for obviously the highlights and stuff like that to go on. I don't want it to pool anywhere on a flat area, but I do want it to pool into those letters so that when it dries it will leave a nice dark stain within those letters, and they'll stand out nicely. Okay, so with the night set aside, allowing the shade paints to dry, I can now move on to the wings. All I'm doing here is taking the ceramite white and obviously just painting this onto all of the, what I would call the feathers. You know, just these long pieces coming out. Don't really know what to call them, so I will refer to them as the feather area throughout this piece. So essentially the wings are split into 3 separate areas that are going to be coloured. That's the feather areas that I'm doing here, the gold areas, which are the meteor pieces and the spiked piece that curves over them, and then the black areas, which will be the piece in between the meteors, just next to where the brush is there that I was painting. But what we will do is get all of the feather area painted first, due to the way that I do this and the technique, and then once that is done we can then go on and do the gold and black areas. What I will do is show you one wing only. Obviously each wing has 2 sides, and this technique will be done on all 4 sides, so both wings, both sides, plus a little bit that this guy has in the middle of his pat between the wings. So I'll get on with this, get a nice good coat of white on there, and we'll be back in just a bit. Yeah, and welcome back. So the wing on the left there is the look that we are going to be going for. So you can see now I've got the white as saturated as I could get it, and I'm just taking some Incubi Darkness and a dry brush, and as you can see here I'm getting the majority of it off. Again, I'm not going for a dry brush with this. I just want to get it into the white. Now, because of the Incubi Darkness being a little bit thinned down, it's not going to give a full coverage. You can see that as I sort of jab this on, it's going on thin. It's leaving, some of that white is showing through. What I'm trying to do is spread this down the wings to about 3/4 of the way down, so just before the long tips separate from the main area of the wing. And what we're going to do is then blend this back with some Sotek green, which is what I'm using here. So all I'm doing while the paint is still wet, this allows me to blend the 2 together. I'm not too worried about having that darker line that we can see there at the minute. The Sotek green and the stages later on will fix that. What I will do after this step is let this dry and then go back in and do the same thing again over the top. So using the Incubi Darkness, I will go in, darken that up near the top of the wing, and then the Sotek green I will bring further down. So all I'm trying to do here is, like I say, just very sort of wet blending the colours together, using a stippling motion and sort of that backwards and forwards motion to sort of soft blend it in. So you can see here now I'm using the stippling. The stippling motion is going to have the paint stick to the wet paint better than if I was to brush it on. You can see here if I start brushing, that sort of spreads away and pulls the paint off. And what I'm obviously looking to do is get the Incubi Darkness saturated toward the top, and then have that fade down a little bit with the Sotek green further down the bottom. So I'll get on with this, let this dry, and then we'll come back for the next step. Okay, so now that this is dried, this is what we've got to work with. Obviously it's a little bit patchy, a little bit messy, but what I'm now doing is taking some of that ceramite white and brushing that over all of the sort of these spikes, the ends of the feathers. What I will then do is, as the paint obviously is deposited onto those bristles, there's going to be less on my brush. I can then work that with a dry brush type motion, just making sure obviously that I've got some of the excess removed there. I can use a dry brushing motion and essentially blend that white up. Now this is going to take a few layers, especially down towards where the feathers separate from themselves and become those more ray type spikes. These spikes are sharp, by the way, guys, so do be careful with these. I very nearly sort of jabbed myself a couple of times with some of the spiky bits on this, so do be careful holding this. And I did actually snap the top one off, as you can see just on the frame here. The top one on the right I did actually snap off whilst painting it. Luckily I managed to glue it back on and you can't tell a difference, but just be careful with, you know, how much pressure you are applying to some of this. But essentially what I'm looking for is to get this to blend from the white up to that inky by darkness, but using dry brushing. Now the more you dry brush on, the more paint is obviously going to be deposited, so the more saturated and white you're going to get. As you are trying to blend this up, obviously you're not going to go over as many times nearer the incubi as I would nearer the outer edges where the white is. So what that's going to do is some of that incubi darkness and that Sotek green is going to show through that lighter white dry brushing, and that's what's going to give us a little bit of a smoother blend. So as I said, I'll get layering this up with multiple dry brushing, pretty much doing exactly the same as I am now, and we'll come back and take a look once this is done. And here we go. So what I'm now doing is just taking some of that pure ceramite white and the brush and applying this to the tips here, as well as using it to faintly run a line up the raised area that goes up into the feathers slightly. Not too much, this is, you know, maybe just touching into it, but all I'm trying to do here is get that nice bright white saturated tips that then fade up into that blue as they work themselves up the feathers. Right, so now that the wings are done, I can take some Abaddon black and very carefully, obviously I don't want to go over anything that I've already done, just blacken out the areas that will be gold and the areas that will be black. So as I mentioned earlier, all of these curved sections here that I'm doing now with the spikes on it, as well as that meteor that sort of goes into it, will be gold. And between those sections where you have what looks like 3 flames coming off of a little bit between the meteors, that will be black. This was personal choice. I did think of doing it all gold, but I wanted something just to separate the gold a little bit. So I figured if I have gold on these meteors and the spiky bits, and then the black on the pieces in between them. So once again, I'll get on with this, get everything blacked out, and we'll come back for the golds. Okay, so once again, doing the gold in exactly the same way as we did on the armour. That's applying the Balthazar gold as the base tone, and then going back in with the Retributor armour as the highlight area, so obviously using it to edge highlight as well as that mid-tone area. So you can see here I've left that black area between the gold piece and this piece that I'm now painted gold, and I will do the same with the little bit on the other side, and then that outer meteor and spike bit will be gold. So that's just so you guys can see without me having to muddle up all my words. You can see exactly what I mean when I say that black, gold, black sort of areas. Okay, so I've now attached everything except for the bird to the model. I've done this with super glue, not plastic glue, just in case there was paint or undercoat between the two joins. Plastic glue would not work. Super glue will give a much better hold on primed and painted areas. And what I'm now doing is taking some thinned down Ushapti bone and going over the banner to blend those highlight areas. And what I'm trying to do is use the Ushapti bone as a highlight, and the area that was stained with the sepia I want to use as darker banner. So that's the reason I'm using thin down paint, is that I can get a smooth blend between the two. Obviously it goes on a little bit brighter, and then as the paint dries, some of that darker area shows through and you get a nice little blend between them. What I will then do is use this to edge highlight all of the highlight areas as well as the letters. So I'll get on with this, and then we'll come back to add in another layer of highlight to the banner here. Okay, and for the final edge highlighting on this, I'm just taking some Morghast bone and just edge highlighting anywhere where the light is going to hit on those outside edges, and then picking off the engravings. On the top section here and anywhere that is more of a flat surface, I will edge highlight both edges, you know, inside and outside edges. On the edges that are more slightly in shadow or at a vertical to the light rather than parallel with it, I will pick off the edges where the light would hit. So just an example on this character here, obviously I'm picking the top of the edges here. You can see what I'm trying to do. The light is coming from the right and above, and so it's going to pick the left hand side of everything, and then on anywhere that is vertical with it, it will pick out that edge as well. So vertical edges and left hand side of curves and things like that. Okay, so right here are the 4 colours that I'm going to use for the Phoenix, which is what we are now working on. The Night Venator himself is finished. So first of all, I'm taking the Avalon Sunset, and I'm just using this as a base coat for the yellows to look a little bit brighter. Yellow isn't the best colour at getting nicely saturated. So I find that if you go in with a slightly more orange undertone, I know that some people do use pink, but I find anything, you know, Avalon Sunset, it's a fairly good base paint. A couple of layers on there gets it nice and saturated, which allows the brighter yellow to go over the top and remain a little bit vibrant. Obviously, if you guys are still with me watching this, thank you ever so much. I know this one has been a bit of a longer video. In all honesty, this video is up late. It should have gone up last week, but this model took me around about 6 hours to paint. I was expecting it to do it in about 2 hours, so 3 times longer than I expected. But I hope that you guys are enjoying the video and that it is helping you. If you are enjoying the video, please hit that like button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. And if you are a new subscriber, welcome to the channel and thank you for subscribing. So yeah, I will get on with this and we'll come back, and then what I'll do, I'll then leave the rest of the video to play all the way through without any cuts, so that you guys can see exactly what I'm doing. It will just be a bit sped up to try and save up on time a little bit, and I'll just voice over you know, a little bit where I think it's needed. So I'll catch you guys in just a bit. Okay, so with that all done, you can see I've not painted the tips of the tail there. I'm not too bothered, that's going to be saturated with the red. I'm now taking some Flashkits yellow and some Troll Slayer Orange, and then on the end of that I will be putting a drop of Evil Sun's Scarlet. These are the three colours that I'm going to be using for the Phoenix, and this is going to blend from the yellow to the red, working from the front of the bird to the back. Now the feathers here are split into three layers. We've got the top layer here that I'm now painting, a middle row which will be done with the Troll Slayer Orange, and then the last lot which will be done with the reds. Now what I'm trying to do is get a smooth blend, almost as though this bird is made of fire, but still keeping those individual feathers showing. So what I'm doing is applying some of the colour. I am not cleaning my brush between these layers. What I am doing is allowing some of that excess paint on the brush to blend in with the other colours that I'm applying, and almost mixing it live straight onto the model rather than mixing the colour on the palette. Now for the centre of the bird, obviously I had to try and follow roughly down with the levels of the wings and the layer of the feathers. So yeah, so all I'm doing is trying to get this saturated, letting it dry slightly. You know, it is a fairly fast because these are going on quite thin. Now I'm not thinning these paints down too much. I do want them a little bit thick, so that I can get them on nice and they stay wet a little bit longer, so I can get a blend between them. So you can see here, as the red starts to run out, it becomes that orange. Obviously at this stage I want that nice and bright red, so I'm just going to get this on here. There's not any small details on this. Everything is quite sort of deep and defined, so I'm not too worried about the details getting hidden up with thick paint. You know, this is going on thin, but it's not like watered down thin or anything like that. And then as you can see here, I'm just trying to get these blends. Now I know it may not make sense what I'm doing, but you can see that it works out. It is hard to explain. This is a technique that I've tried transferring, and I feel that I've done it quite successfully, you know, in my opinion, from my tattooing skills. I used to be a tattooist. I used to have my own studio, but due to personal circumstances I no longer tattoo at the minute. But essentially what I would do with my tattooing is blend the inks within the needle and then into the skin. So when I'm doing more realistic colours, sometimes I wouldn't rinse the needles out between colours. I would dip between the colours and use them to sort of muddy up within the tube, and then that would blend into the skin. And it's very similar to what I'm doing here with the brush. Without rinsing it out, without cleaning it, I'm blending these colours together. It's not wet blending in the sense that I've seen other artists or painters describe it as. Usually for that kind of wet blending you would have a wet watered down or thinned down paint in the back of the brush, and then you would have a small dot of colour on the tip of the brush, and you would use that to blend them back. This is more what a canvas painter would call a wet on wet technique. So this is wet paint being applied straight on top of wet paint and using that to blend it together. So yeah, obviously here I'm now doing the underside of the bird, blending it down. Like I say, the way that this paint is, it's staying wet for quite some time. If you're in an area where it's a little bit more humid or dry and the paint dries out a little bit quick, obviously this is going to be a bit difficult, but there are acrylic retarders that you can apply and mix into your paints to make them dry out a little bit slower, which will obviously give you a little bit more time to mix and blend on the model. Another way would be to use maybe oil paints or something like that, but I find with oil paints the drying time is a bit in excess. It's a bit too long for what you would need for miniature painting. For some oil paints you could be looking hours or even, days, even a couple of weeks. at least when it's worked on canvas. On modelling, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm still assuming it would be, you know, hours. So yeah, you know, like I said, this is a bit more of an experiment for me, but it worked out well. Okay, so what I've done there, just off the screen, obviously I've just rinsed the brush out, and this is now to get a bit of a nicer yellow for those edges. And again, I'm now mixing in the yellow with the orange and blending that back out to get that nicer orange. Now obviously the ends of the tail here, I wanted a really fiery look, so I'm trying to get that nice blend from the body into a saturated red on the ends of the tail here. Right, so once all that has dried, I'm now taking a watered down, a very thin down Mephiston red, and using this as a shade just to catch in between those overlapping feathers. Obviously the Mephiston red will work well with the Evil Sunz Scarlet here, so I'm just going over the top and letting it pull down in those recesses, and also on some of the orange. I can then go in a bit with the Evil Sunz and thin that down and use that across the orange. And here I think I'm using a mix of the Evil Sunz and the orange for the yellow. Like I say, all this is just to pick out those recesses between each of the feathers and just to taint it up a little bit. Right, and now that that's dried, I'm just taking some of the colours, and as you can see here, I'm just using them as an edge highlight for each successive or previous layer. So obviously the red is going to have the Troll Slayer orange. The Troll Slayer orange will use some of the yellow for the edge highlighting, and then the yellow itself I will again just pick off with the yellow mixed in with a little bit of white, just to pick off, like I say, the edges of these feathers. Okay, and finally, to add that sort of fire burning effect to this, I'm just taking some Abaddon Black and dry brushing this heavily over the ends of the tail, and then just a little bit over the sort of, you know, each of those little spiky bits that are coming off. The idea of this, obviously, as the flames sort of feather out, they get that darker sort of black smoke start to form on the edge, which to me just gives a really nice look to miniature fire. Obviously realistic fire looks a bit different, but this just gives it that more realistic look to it. What I'll do, obviously now I'm just being lazy here and applying that Abaddon Black straight to my tissue, my paper towel, so that I can get it a little bit thicker, and then I can work that straight off of that paper towel then. I'll also do this over the red on the wings, just on the sort of the outer tips here, This just gives that slightly smoky edge to them, which again makes it all stand out. Now I know I did the edge highlighting here, but obviously I did need that on there as it's going to show where some of that black doesn't touch on those areas. So what I'll do is the same again for the underside, and then with that done I will then attach them to the model and we can come back and take a look at the finished piece. And there he is, guys. I know he's a little bit difficult to see on screen there. I do need a bigger light box. He's a little bit too big for mine. There are some pictures on my Instagram of him, so if you'd like to check the description below, there's a link to my Instagram there. Go follow me there for photos of work in progress and things like that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, and if you would like to subscribe, hit that subscription button. And until next time, guys, thank you ever so much for joining me for yet another video. Take it easy and keep painting those minis.